Who could possibly put up with that old lady's temperament? My name is Margaret Ellis. I still remember the sting of those words like a slap across the face. Who could possibly put up with that old lady's temperament? My daughter-in-law said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet of the room. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen folding the dish towel and putting away plates when I heard her voice drift in from the living room. She didn't know I was within earshot. She thought her words were safe, tucked into a conversation with my son, her husband. And yet they cut me clean through. Who could possibly put up with that old lady's temperament? I froze my hand gripping the towel until my knuckles went white. She said it so casually, as though I were nothing more than a nuisance, an old piece of furniture cluttering up her home. My home. The house I had worked decades to pay for, teaching in a small classroom full of restless children coming home late with aching feet, saving every cent to build a life for my family. Now, in the span of one sentence, I was reduced to an annoyance. My son didn't answer right away. The silence was worse than her words. Because in that silence I understood something I had never dared to believe: he agreed with her, or at least he didn't disagree. And for a mother, that kind of betrayal bites deeper than any insult. I remember leaning against the counter trying to steady myself. My breath came shallow, my throat tight, as if I had swallowed something bitter. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, skipping meals when money was tight, buying him new shoes when mine had holes, staying up through the night when he was sick as a boy. And this was the repayment. I should have marched into the room right then and confronted her. But something inside me whispered, not yet. Instead, I walked quietly back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the words play again and again in my head. That old lady's temperament. As though I were a storm to be endured, not a human being who had loved and given and endured more than they would ever know. I thought about my late husband, how he would have defended me. He was never a man of many words, but he had a strong presence, one that demanded respect. If he had been here, no one would have dared to speak of me that way. But he was gone, and the only one left to protect me, my son, sat in silence. It's strange, isn't it? How a home can go from feeling safe to suffocating in a single moment. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house, every hum of the refrigerator felt amplified in the quiet. I wondered what had changed. I had tried to be kind, helpful. I cooked their favorite meals, folded their laundry when they were busy, even kept myself out of their way when they needed space. And still, I was the old lady with a bad temperament. I began to question myself. Was I really that difficult? Had age hardened me into someone bitter, someone intolerable? But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I knew what this was. My daughter-in-law had been weaving this narrative for months, a slow drip of complaints, each designed to make me seem smaller, more unreasonable, more of a burden. And my son, blinded by love or perhaps convenience, let it happen. I realized then that I was being erased piece by piece. But if there's one thing decades of teaching children taught me, it's patience. You don't correct a child by shouting. You watch, you wait, and you choose your moment. So I swallowed my pride. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry where she could see. Instead, I made a quiet promise to myself. One day she would regret underestimating me. One day she would realize that the old lady with the bad temperament was not someone to be dismissed so easily. Because behind every quiet woman lies a well of strength that no insult can dry up. And I, Margaret Ellis, was not finished yet. The morning after those words, the house felt different to me. Nothing had moved, nothing had broken, but it was as though the air itself had shifted. The walls, once a comfort, seemed to lean in closer, as though conspiring to remind me that I no longer belonged here. I brewed my coffee slowly, the kettle hissing on the stove, while the sun stretched long golden fingers through the kitchen curtains. It should have been a peaceful start to the day, but all I could hear was the echo of Claire's voice. Who could possibly put up with that old lady's temperament? It replayed like a cruel refrain staining everything. Even the quiet clink of my spoon against the mug felt accusatory. This house had once brimmed with warmth. I could see it clearly if I let my memory wander. When my son Daniel was a boy, these walls held endless laughter. His footsteps pounded up the stairs, he'd leave socks balled under the couch, he'd spill milk, and try to hide the evidence with napkins that never fooled me. I would scold him half-heartedly, but inside, I was glad the house was alive. My husband Charles would come home from his long shifts, loosen his tie, and lean against the doorframe watching us. The evenings felt complete. Even after Charles passed, I told myself the laughter would return one day when Daniel had a family of his own. That was the dream I nursed, that the house wouldn't grow old with me, but would keep blooming with new life. When Daniel married Claire, I clung to that hope. She arrived like a bright burst of energy, her smile polished her voice, always lilting with politeness. At first, I believed she would bring warmth back to this home. She called me Mom in those early months, and I allowed myself to believe she meant it. But I should have known that warmth can sometimes be nothing more than the flicker of a candle in a draft. At first, the changes were subtle, so subtle I told myself I was imagining them. Claire would roll her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, or sigh under her breath when I offered suggestions. She'd reach for the salt after tasting a dish I'd cooked, though she never complained outright. Instead, she mastered the art of dismissing me without words, a glance, a pause, a silence heavy enough to push me out of the room. And Daniel, my Daniel. He was so blinded by love, or perhaps by the ease of avoiding conflict, that he didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to see. The house that once brimmed with chatter began to quiet. Meals once shared at the dining table grew irregular. They would go out together, returning with the smell of restaurant food clinging to their clothes. If I had cooked, they would politely take small bites before excusing themselves. Weekends, which used to be reserved for family traditions, movies in the living room, gardening in the backyard. Sunday breakfast slipped away, replaced by outings they never invited me to join. I became a shadow in my own home, moving quietly so as not to intrude. I'd hear them whispering in the next room, their laughter soft, private, as though I were an outsider pressing my ear against the door. One particular evening stands out in my memory. I had prepared a full meal: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, the kind of dinner Daniel had adored growing up. I set the table with the good china, the set Charles had given me on our 25th anniversary. It gleamed under the light, a small attempt to bring ritual back, to remind us of who we once were. When they came downstairs, Claire frowned. "This is too formal. We're just eating chicken." She took her plate and walked straight to the couch, switching on the television. Daniel followed without hesitation, balancing his food on his knees. I sat alone at the table, the empty chairs like silent accusations. I ate in slow bites, the good china mocking me with its polished shine. The house, once alive with laughter, now held only the flicker of a TV screen and the murmur of voices that didn't include me. Do you know what it feels like to be spoken around, to exist in the same space but not in the conversation, to have your presence tolerated rather than cherished? It is not the loneliness of solitude, it is the sharper, more devastating loneliness of invisibility. And yet, invisibility can be a powerful thing. When people think you're not watching, not listening, not present, they reveal themselves. I began to see more than they realized. I noticed the way Claire steered conversations, always guiding Daniel's attention back to her. If I tried to speak, she would interrupt smoothly, making it seem unintentional. I noticed how decisions about money, about the house, about Daniel's job were made without me, though this house was mine and always had been. And worst of all, I noticed Daniel's silence. Silence when she dismissed me. Silence when she excluded me. Silence when she insulted me outright. A silence that cut deeper than any words. But here is what Claire didn't understand. Years of teaching children had taught me patience. Patience is a kind of armor. You don't rush to correct every misstep, you wait, you observe, and you strike when the lesson will leave the deepest mark. I stopped trying to be included. I stopped offering my opinion where it wasn't wanted. I cooked less, spoke less, moved more quietly. And in that quiet, I began to collect small truths. I watched her carefully. I listened from the shadows she had pushed me into. One day she would learn that silence does not equal weakness. That day when she mocked me to Daniel with her cruel words, she thought she had succeeded in erasing me. But all she had done was sharpen my resolve. The house may feel colder now, but I still know where the matches are kept. And when the time comes, I will strike one not to burn everything down, but to remind them that this house, this life, was built on sacrifices they cannot so easily dismiss. Because while Claire thinks she is in control, she has overlooked something crucial. You cannot erase the one who built the foundation. Silence. That was my son's answer to almost everything these days. When I was younger, I used to believe silence was golden. That if you held your tongue at the right moments, you could keep the peace, avoid unnecessary conflict, and allow tempers to cool. But there is another kind of silence, one that doesn't soothe, but wounds. The silence of someone who refuses to defend you when you are being cut down. The silence of someone who should stand beside you but chooses to look away. That was the silence Daniel gave me. Every time Claire dismissed me with a sarcastic remark, he would shift uncomfortably, his jaw tightening just slightly, and then nothing. No protest. No gentle correction. Not even a look of acknowledgement in my direction. He let her words hang in the air as though they were true, as though I deserved them. And in that silence, I began to disappear. It is hard to explain the peculiar cruelty of invisibility. To be present in body but absent in acknowledgement. To sit at the dinner table and speak only to have your words float away unclaimed, as though you were whispering into a void. I would ask Daniel how his work was going. Claire would answer for him, brushing me off with, "Oh, he's doing fine. Busy, but fine." He would nod, grateful for her interruption. I'd try again. "Daniel, do you still enjoy working with Mr. Harris? You always admired him." And he would look at Claire, waiting for her to decide whether he should answer. Usually she changed the subject before he could. One night I asked, "Shall we plan something for the holidays this year?" My heart was full of tentative hope, remembering years past when we decorated together, strung lights, baked cookies, filled the living room with music. Claire laughed lightly. "Oh, Daniel and I have already made plans. We're going skiing with friends. You wouldn't enjoy it, it's too cold for you. Too cold for me." As though I were some fragile relic unable to endure life outside the comfort of my chair. Daniel smiled sheepishly, never meeting my eyes. That was when it struck me. I wasn't being ignored by accident. I was being pushed out deliberately, step by step. The conversations, the outings, the plans, they were being carefully curated to exclude me. Claire wanted me erased, and Daniel was letting it happen. I began to notice the smaller details. The way Claire rearranged the living room without asking, replacing the photographs of Charles and me with glossy framed prints of landscapes. The way she placed my treasured porcelain vase, a gift from my mother, in the attic for safekeeping, as if my belongings were clutter. The way Daniel never protested when she did these things, though. I saw the faint guilt flicker in his eyes. It wasn't only the home she was changing, it was the narrative. She painted me as irritable. "Don't mind her, Daniel. You know how your mother gets when things don't go her way," she'd say if I dared to object. If I sighed, she'd mutter, "See, always so dramatic." If I asked a question, she'd smirk. "She's just nosy." And Daniel let it happen. Do you know what it does to a woman, to a mother, to have her own child stand silently by while she is diminished? It doesn't just hurt, it hollows you out. It makes you question whether all those years of sacrifice, All those sleepless nights, all those moments of pride and love were real or imagined. I would sit in my room at night staring at the photo of Daniel as a boy. His hair messy, his smile wide, his arms slung around my shoulders. He had once looked at me as though I were his anchor, his safe place. Now he could barely look at me at all. The irony was cruel. When Charles was alive, Daniel used to say, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." And now I was treated as a fragile inconvenience, a woman with a temperament too difficult to endure. But beneath the pain, something else was growing, a quiet awareness. By making me invisible, they thought they were stripping me of power. But invisibility has its advantages. When people forget you are there, they reveal themselves. I started listening more carefully, watching the way their dynamic unfolded when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I saw how Claire controlled the finances, always the one holding the checkbook, the bank cards. I heard the arguments muffled behind closed doors, her voice sharp, Daniel's low and defeated. I noticed how she checked his phone, how she managed his schedule, how she spoke to him with the same dismissiveness she used on me. Claire wanted control of Daniel, of the house, of me, and she was succeeding because silence was her greatest weapon. Silence from me, silence from Daniel. But what she didn't realize was that silence can also be a form of resistance. One afternoon, I tested something. I pretended to misplace a bill, leaving it on the counter where Claire could see. It was for the property tax, my property, the house that legally belonged to me. I watched her eyes flicker over it, her mouth tightening ever so slightly before she tucked it away into her purse. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. Another time I mentioned offhandedly to Daniel, I was considering updating the will just to make sure everything is clear. I said it casually, stirring my tea, watching both their reactions. Claire's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. It told me everything I needed to know. I may have been invisible at the dinner table, but I was still the one who held the foundation of their lives in my hands. The house, the inheritance, the stability they relied on, it was mine to give or to take. And slowly, I realized that was where my strength lay. The sting of invisibility had not destroyed me. It had sharpened me, forced me to see more clearly than I had in years. If they wanted to erase me, they had underestimated how much of this family's story I still held in my grasp. Daniel's silence hurt, yes. But even his silence could not undo the truth. I was not finished. I would not be erased. And one day, when the moment came, they would both learn just how loud an invisible woman can become. If exclusion was the first cut, then humiliation was the second. And sometimes, humiliation doesn't come with shouting or insults. It comes quietly, wrapped in smiles and small talk, until you realize you're no longer a person in the room, you're a ghost, hovering on the edge of conversations. That was what I had become in my own family. It began with subtle moments easy to overlook, if I hadn't already been paying attention. At the dinner table, they would discuss Daniel's work projects, Claire's social outings, vacations they were planning. Their voices would weave around each other in quick exchanges, leaving no space for me to join in. If I tried to contribute, my words were met with polite nods or quick topic changes. One evening, I mentioned a book I'd been reading, a memoir by a woman my age who had rebuilt her life after losing everything. "It's extraordinary," I said softly, how much strength she found in herself. It made me think of Claire, cut me off smoothly, her eyes already on Daniel. "Speaking of strength, didn't your boss say he admired how you handled that meeting yesterday?" Daniel brightened, diving into the story. My words dissolved into the air like smoke. I sat there, my spoon idle in my hand, the soup cooling in front of me. It was as though I hadn't spoken at all. Other times, they forgot to include me in plans altogether. Once, Daniel's cousin invited them over for a barbecue. I heard about it afterward when Daniel mentioned casually, "The food was great. You would have loved the ribs." I blinked at him. I wasn't invited. Oh, he muttered, glancing quickly at Claire. She smiled, her lips thin. We didn't want to tire you out. These gatherings can be overwhelming. Overwhelming. The word stung every time she used it, as though I were some fragile relic incapable of enjoying what had once been the heart of my life. Those family barbecues had been traditions I helped build, laughter spilling into the night while children ran barefoot across the grass. Now I was excluded from my own family's joy, reduced to an afterthought. But the cruelest cut came during Daniel's birthday. I had spent the day preparing baking his favorite chocolate cake, the same recipe I'd made since he was a boy. I decorated it with careful hands, my heart aching with both love and longing. It was a way of reminding him that no matter how old he became, he would always be my son. That evening, when I brought the cake into the dining room, I expected at least a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Instead, I saw embarrassment. Claire laughed lightly, clapping her hands. "Oh, Margaret, you're so sweet. But we actually ordered a cake from the new bakery downtown. It's trendy, you know, everyone's talking about it." She gestured, and Daniel carried in a pristine, glossy cake from a white box adorned with elaborate decorations. My homemade cake, imperfect but full of memory, sat forgotten on the counter. "Don't worry," Claire added, patting my arm with mock sympathy. "We'll save yours for tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. The cake remained untouched until I finally wrapped it up and placed it in the freezer, tears blurring my vision. I was no longer a participant in family life. I was an accessory. Something tolerated, politely ignored, gently pushed aside. They didn't scream at me. They didn't argue. They simply pretended I wasn't there. And in many ways, that was worse. Do you know what it feels like to vanish while still alive? To sit in a room full of people you love and feel like a ghost among them? That was my existence now. But here's the thing about invisibility. It gives you time to see what others miss. From the edges of their conversations, I began to notice cracks. Claire's laughter sometimes sounded forced, her smile brittle. Daniel's shoulders carried a weight I recognized, the heaviness of a man caught in constant appeasement. Their marriage, though polished on the outside, was fraying at the edges. And though they ignored me, I listened. I heard the arguments muffled behind their bedroom door. Claire's sharp tone, "You never stand up for me." Daniel's weary reply, "I just don't want another fight." I realized something important. Then silence was not just his weapon against me, it was the cage he lived in too. Still, it didn't soften the hurt. At another family gathering, this one at Claire's friend's house, I sat quietly on the couch while conversations swirled around me. People spoke of vacations, promotions, new homes. My voice felt trapped in my chest, unsure if it would even be heard if I let it out. At one point, I tried to share a memory from when Daniel was young, a light-hearted story about him learning to ride a bike. But midway through, Claire's friend interrupted, turning to her with a question about her latest project. The story died in my mouth. Daniel didn't even notice. That was the moment I felt it most sharply. I wasn't just being forgotten. I was being erased. But erasure, as painful as it is, has a strange effect. It forces you inward. It makes you examine yourself in ways you never had to before. Was I really so intolerable as Claire painted me to be? Did my presence truly burden them? The answer, I decided, was no. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't overwhelming. I was a woman who had given her life to her family, who had raised a son with every ounce of strength and love she had. And now I was being punished for existing beyond my usefulness. That realization didn't break me. It hardened me. Because if they thought I would simply fade away, they were wrong. I began to watch more carefully, to listen more intently. Every slight, every insult disguised as kindness, every act of erasure, I stored them away. Like a teacher keeping meticulous notes on a wayward student, I was recording everything. They believed I was a forgotten presence fading quietly in the background. But they were mistaken. I was preparing. And one day, when the moment came, they would remember me not as the woman they tried to erase, but as the woman who refused to disappear. There comes a point when even the most patient heart stops begging. I had spent months, perhaps even years, hoping for small gestures of kindness, a word of acknowledgement, a place at the table that felt like mine again. But every time I reached out, I was met with dismissal, interruption, or silence. And so one day, I simply stopped. I stopped trying to wedge myself into their conversations. I stopped waiting by the window, hoping they'd invite me along when the car pulled out of the driveway. I stopped cooking meals they never ate, planning traditions they no longer valued, or offering advice they didn't want. It was as if a switch had flipped inside me. The pleading mother gave way to the watchful observer. If Claire wanted me invisible, I would become invisible on my own terms. But invisibility, when chosen, is not weakness. It is strategy. I began to move quietly, listening more than I spoke. And in that silence, I discovered truths they thought I was too blind, too old, or too irrelevant to see. The first thing I noticed was Claire's talent for manipulation. She wielded words like a painter with a brush, crafting whatever image she wanted others to believe. Around Daniel's friends, she was the charming wife, supportive, witty, endlessly patient. At church gatherings, she became the dutiful daughter-in-law, her arm looped through mine, calling me mom, with saccharine sweetness that made people smile. But at home, when the audience was gone, her mask slipped. Her eyes were cold, her tone sharp, her patience thin. She corrected me constantly, the way I folded laundry, the way I stored food, even the way I dusted the shelves. "You missed a spot," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. Or, "That's not how people do it anymore, Margaret. Times have changed. It wasn't about dust or laundry. It was about control." And Daniel, my sweet, weary son, allowed it. His silence had become a reflex, a shield against conflict. He let her speak for him, decide for him, even think for him. I could see the fatigue in his eyes, the quiet surrender of a man who had chosen peace over truth. But I was no longer surrendering. I kept my observations to myself, storing them like coins in a jar. Every dismissal, every manipulation, every time she twisted the truth to make me look unreasonable. One evening, I sat in the living room while they argued in the kitchen. They didn't realize how sound carries in this old house. "You spend too much," Daniel said quietly. Claire's reply was sharp. "I spend for us, Daniel. For this home, for appearances. Do you want people to think we're struggling?" "We are struggling," he muttered. "You know my paycheck doesn't cover." Her voice cut through his like a whip. "Then maybe your mother should contribute more. She lives here for free, eats. Here uses the electricity. What has she given us lately?" Nothing. I sat frozen, my fingers clutching the armrest. Nothing. After decades of building this home, after years of giving everything I had, she dared to say, I contributed nothing. And Daniel, my own son, said nothing in return. The humiliation burned, but beneath it another feeling stirred clarity. She wasn't just trying to erase me emotionally. She wanted to erase my claim to this home, to the life I had built. To turn me from owner to burden. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something vital. My silence, my restraint, had given her room to build her story. But stories can be rewritten. And this time, I would be the one holding the pen. I began to take small steps, careful not to draw attention. I reconnected with old friends, women I hadn't spoken to in years. I called them under the pretense of catching up, but really, I was rebuilding something Claire had tried to take from me, my confidence. Each conversation reminded me I was still seen, still valued, still someone whose voice mattered. I also started keeping records. Receipts, bills, little notes about things Claire said or did. At first, it felt paranoid, but the more I watched her, the more I realized how deliberate her actions were. She wasn't careless. She was strategic. Every comment, every dismissal, every move to isolate me was part of a larger plan. And if she was building a case against me, then I would build one against her. One afternoon while she was out, I opened the desk drawer in the study. Claire often used it to store household papers. That's when I saw them: credit card statements, bank withdrawals, purchases that didn't add up. Designer clothes, spa visits, dinners at restaurants I'd never even heard of. All paid for with money Daniel didn't have. I didn't take the papers, not yet, but I made mental notes, sharp and precise. Later, I asked Daniel casually, "Do you and Claire ever go to Le Chanson? It looks very expensive." He frowned. "No, why?" I shook my head, sipping my tea, pretending it was nothing. But inside, I felt the power of what I had discovered. Claire still thought she was winning. She thought she had silenced me, erased me, pushed me into the margins of their lives. But what she didn't realize was that silence can be louder than any shout. Every day I remained quiet, I was collecting. Every smile I faked, every nod I gave, was another page in the book I was writing about her. She believed I was powerless. She believed I was beaten. She believed her story would stand unchallenged. But she was wrong. Because while she played her games in the open, I was learning hers in secret. And soon the woman she mocked as an old lady with a bad temperament would show her just how dangerous patience can be. The thing about masks is that they eventually slip. No matter how carefully someone polishes their smile, no matter how sweetly they lace their words in front of others, the truth always seeps out in the quiet moments. Claire had built her entire identity around performance. Around friends and neighbors, she was radiant, gracious, supportive, endlessly charming. She could make strangers believe she adored me, even looping her arm through mine at church, calling me Mom, in a voice dripping with false affection. People would look at me with envy, whispering how lucky I was to have such a loving daughter-in-law. If only they knew the venom hidden beneath that smile. But lately I had begun to see cracks forming in her perfect facade. It started small, like hairline fractures in glass. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. She was pacing the living room, her voice sharp. Nothing like the gentle lilt she used in public. "I told you not to call me when I'm at home," she hissed. Her back turned. "No, he doesn't know, because he doesn't need to know. Just take care of it." Her tone was laced with panic. She ended the call abruptly when she noticed me lingering in the hallway. She plastered on a smile. "Oh, that was just a friend from college, going through a rough time." But her eyes betrayed her: too wide, too alert, too defensive. For the first time, I wondered if Daniel was the only one being deceived. The cracks widened during arguments with Daniel. I had grown accustomed to hearing their muffled voices late at night. Claire scolding, Daniel sighing, both of them circling the same issues. But one night the argument spilled over so loudly that even I couldn't ignore it. "You can't keep spending like this," Daniel snapped, his voice breaking through the walls. "We're drowning, Claire." Her response was like a whip. "Don't you dare blame me. Do you think your mother contributes anything? She sits here all day eating, using electricity, doing nothing. Maybe if she weren't such a burden—" "Stop it." Daniel cut in, his voice low but firm. The house fell silent. I sat frozen on my bed, my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I had heard Daniel defend me, not loudly, not bravely, but enough to make Claire stop. It was the faintest glimmer of the sun I once knew, but it wasn't only in private that Claire's mask slipped. One Sunday, we attended a family gathering at Daniel's aunt's house. Claire, as always, was the star of the evening until she wasn't. Someone complimented her on the new bracelet she wore, an elegant piece that glittered in the light. "Oh, thank you," she said, with a practiced laugh. It was such a thoughtful gift from Daniel. But Daniel's cousin raised an eyebrow. "Really, I saw one just like it at the boutique downtown. Very expensive. Didn't you two say you were cutting back?" Claire faltered. Just for a second, her smile froze, her eyes darted to Daniel. He forced a laugh, brushing it off. "We manage. But the cousin's comment hung in the air, and I caught the faint whispers that followed. For once, people weren't looking at me with pity. They were looking at Claire with suspicion. I tucked the moment away in my memory. At home, I began to see more of the small outbursts that slipped through her polished exterior. Once, she snapped at Daniel over something trivial, the way he folded a towel. Her voice rose sharp and ugly before she caught me watching from the doorway. In an instant, she softened, smiling sweetly. "Oh, Margaret, I was just showing Daniel a better way to do it. You know how men are. Her ability to switch masks so quickly might have fooled others, but I had lived long enough to know the difference between genuine warmth and calculated charm. And Claire's warmth was nothing but calculation. But here is what struck me most: she underestimated me. She thought because I was quiet, I was powerless. Because I had stopped speaking up, I had surrendered. She believed her mask still fooled me, that I was too fragile, too naive to see her for who she truly was. But invisibility had sharpened my sight. I noticed how her eyes flickered when money was mentioned. I noticed the way she guarded her phone, keeping it close even at home. I noticed her unease whenever the topic of Will's property or inheritance came up. And more importantly, I noticed the slow shift in Daniel. At first, he had been her echo, repeating her words, nodding along. But recently I saw hesitation, guilt, weariness. He didn't laugh as easily. He didn't meet her eyes as often. He lingered longer when I spoke, as though remembering that my voice once mattered to him. The cracks weren't just in Claire's mask, they were in their marriage. One night, after another argument, I found Daniel sitting alone in the living room, his head in his hands. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if he wanted me there. But when he looked up, his eyes were tired, haunted. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think I made a mistake?" The question pierced me. I wanted to tell him everything about the manipulations I'd seen, the lies I suspected, the cruelty I endured. But I knew the time wasn't right. He wasn't ready to hear the full truth. Not yet. So I placed a hand on his shoulder. "A mistake isn't in who you marry, Daniel. It's in what you allow afterward. Don't let someone else silence who you are." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a brief moment I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who once believed his mother was the strongest person he knew. Claire's footsteps approached, and the mask slipped back over his face. But I had seen the crack, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the entire facade crumbled. For now I remained silent, collecting evidence, watching as Claire's perfect image fractured under the weight of her own lies. She believed she had won, but what she didn't know was that the more her mask slipped, the closer I came to reclaiming the power she had stolen, because the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, no mask, no performance, no manipulation can hold it back. And I, Margaret Ellis, was patient enough to wait. Strength does not always return in a roar. Sometimes it comes back in whispers, in the steady rhythm of your heartbeat, in the small decisions you make each day to reclaim yourself. For months, I had been shrinking, pushed into silence by Claire's cruelty and Daniel's passivity. But as her mask began to slip, as her control over Daniel began to falter, I felt something stirring inside me. Not anger exactly, though that burned too, but clarity. I began to understand survival was not enough. If I wanted to protect myself, if I wanted to reclaim the dignity she had stolen piece by piece, I had to prepare. The first step was simple. I reconnected with the parts of myself she could not erase. I called old friends, women I hadn't spoken to in years. At first, I felt hesitant. What would I even say? That I had let my own home become a place of exile, that I was living as a ghost in the life I had built. But when I heard their voices, warm, familiar, unjudging, something inside me eased. We talked for hours, about books, about recipes, about memories from the school where I had taught for 3 decades. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. "Margaret," one of them said gently, "you always had more strength than anyone else I knew. Don't let them take that from you. Her words lingered. Strength. Not the loud, forceful kind, but the quiet resilience that had carried me through raising a child alone, through burying a husband too soon, through years of balancing bills and late nights grading papers. That strength had not disappeared. It had only been buried. And now I was digging it up again. The second step was knowledge. I began paying closer attention to the house finances, to the documents Claire thought I never noticed. I checked the mail before she could get to it. I read through bank statements, tax notices, bills. And what I found confirmed what I had already suspected: Claire was bleeding money. Designer purchases, spa appointments, expensive restaurants, all hidden under vague labels. Daniel didn't seem to know. Or perhaps he chose not to know, letting her spin excuses until he convinced himself they were true. But I knew. I began keeping a small notebook tucked away in my dresser. Every expense, every discrepancy, every overheard argument, I wrote it all down. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with it, but I knew I would need it one day. And if Claire wanted to paint me as irrelevant as a burden, she was about to learn that an old lady with a bad temperament could be sharper, more observant, and more dangerous than she imagined. The third step was protection. I made an appointment with a lawyer, an old acquaintance from my teaching days, whose daughter had been one of my students. We met in his office downtown, where the smell of old books mixed with fresh ink. I need advice, I told him, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. About my house, my property. I need to make sure I'm not vulnerable. He listened carefully, nodding. I explained enough without giving away everything: about living with my son and his wife, about feeling pressured, about overhearing comments that unsettled me. Margaret, he said, leaning back in his chair, this house is yours. You paid for it. Unless you sign it over, no one can take it from you. But, he paused, if you're concerned about future manipulation, we can make certain protections legal now. A will, a trust, a written statement of intent. That way, no one can twist your silence into consent. I left his office lighter than I had felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't just enduring, I was preparing. Meanwhile, Claire's control was slipping further. I noticed it in the way she snapped more easily, her voice rising quicker, her smile faltering sooner. She scrolled on her phone late into the night, her face tight with frustration. And Daniel, though still quiet, had begun to resist in small ways. Once, when she dismissed me in front of him, he said, "That's enough, Claire." It was only 3 words spoken softly, but they cracked the air between us. She glared at him, then at me, as though I had orchestrated his rebellion. But I didn't need to. She was unraveling all on her own. I also began quietly reclaiming small parts of the house. The photographs she had moved to the corners I rehung in the hallway. My porcelain vase I brought down from the attic and placed on the mantel. When she raised an eyebrow, I smiled politely. These are family memories, Claire. They belong here. She didn't argue, not then. But her eyes hardened, and I knew she understood I was no longer playing her game. One afternoon, I overheard her again, this time, not on the phone, but with a friend visiting. "I can't stand living with her much longer," she muttered, unaware I was in the next room. "Always lurking, always watching. Daniel's too weak to do anything about it. Sometimes I think the only way she'll leave is if—" Her voice trailed off into a laugh, but it wasn't light. It was sharp, bitter. Her friend chuckled nervously. "Careful, Claire." I stood there, my hands gripping the counter, my heart thudding. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. For the first time, I felt a chill of danger. This wasn't just about exclusion anymore. She wanted me gone. That night, as I sat in my room, I stared at the notebook where I had written everything. Every slight, every manipulation, every piece of evidence. And I realized I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing for war. Not the kind of war fought with screaming or fists, but the kind fought with patience, with observation, with truth. I remembered something my husband used to say when life tested us: Margaret, storms always pass, but if you know where to stand, you can use them to clear the air. Claire thought she was the storm, but she had forgotten that storms can also destroy themselves. And I, the quiet woman she thought she could erase, would be standing when it was over. I had suspected Claire of deceit for months. The overspending, the hushed phone calls, the guarded way she clutched her purse, all of it painted a picture I could not ignore. But suspicion is only smoke. What I needed was fire. Proof. Something so undeniable that even Daniel could no longer turn away. And one evening, that fire finally revealed itself. It began innocently enough. Daniel had asked me if I'd seen an envelope he misplaced something from the bank. While looking through the desk drawer where Claire often kept papers, I noticed a folder tucked in the very back, half buried under old receipts. I shouldn't have opened it. At least that's what my conscience told me. But after months of being called a burden, after being erased from my own home, my patience had run out. My hands trembled as I pulled it free, my heart pounding as though I were committing a crime in my own house. Inside was a stack of documents: bank statements, credit card bills, contracts. And then, the first spark of fire, I saw the withdrawals. Large sums of money taken out in cash at odd intervals. Purchases at boutiques, high-end restaurants, jewelry stores. Thousands of dollars. Far more than Daniel's modest salary could justify. I sat back in my chair, stunned. But that wasn't all. Among the papers, I found a printed email from a man's name I didn't recognize. The message was short, but it hit like a blow. I miss you. When will you tell him the truth? The date was recent. My breath caught. My hands shook so violently the paper nearly slipped from my fingers. For a moment, the room spun. It wasn't just financial deception. It was personal, intimate. Claire wasn't just draining money, she was betraying Daniel in ways he hadn't even begun to imagine. I replaced the folder exactly where I had found it, my mind racing. 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Should I confront her immediately? Should I show Daniel? Should I call the man from the email? But then I remembered what patience had taught me. Confrontation without preparation was useless. If I burst in too soon, Claire would twist the story, gaslight Daniel, turn it all against me. She was skilled at manipulation. I had witnessed it too many times to underestimate her. No, I needed to be careful, strategic. I copied down the email and the details of the bank statements into my notebook. Every dollar amount, every date, every suspicious withdrawal. My notes had grown thick over the months, but this was different. This was the turning point. For the first time, I held not just suspicion, but truth. That night, I could barely sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities. How would Daniel react when he learned the truth? Would he defend her, cling to her lies out of fear of losing her? Or would he finally see what I had been seeing all along? I thought back to when he was a boy, how fiercely he had defended me on the playground once when another child mocked me for being older than the other mothers. "Don't you dare talk about my mom like that!" He had shouted, his fists clenched. Where had that boy gone? Could I bring him back with the truth? And yet a part of me feared what the truth would do. Exposing Claire might save Daniel, but it could also break him. Still, the decision had already been made the moment I opened that folder. The truth was out now, and it would not stay hidden forever. The next morning, I tested the waters. At breakfast, I casually asked Claire, "Did you go shopping downtown yesterday? I thought I saw one of those boutique bags in the car." She froze for just a second, a flicker so quick Daniel didn't catch it. Then she smiled. "Oh, that A friend gave it to me. Just a gift. A lie. Smooth practiced, but a lie nonetheless." I nodded, hiding my own smile. How thoughtful of them. Later I mentioned to Daniel, "You must be so proud of Claire managing everything so well." Though I wonder, doesn't it tire her out juggling so many errands? He frowned slightly, puzzled. Errands. What do you mean nothing? I said quickly, stirring my tea. Just an observation. His expression lingered with uncertainty, and I knew I had planted the seed. In the days that followed, I watched her more carefully than ever. And the more I looked, the more I saw. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages she hid from Daniel. She stayed out later claiming she was running errands, but her clothes and hair told a different story. She grew sharper with Daniel snapping at him over trivial things, covering her own unease with cruelty. And Daniel, though still quiet, had begun to notice. I saw it in the way he studied her sometimes. Suspicion creeping into his eyes. The cracks between them were widening. One evening, while they argued in the kitchen, I sat in the living room, my notebook on my lap. "You're always gone?" Daniel said, frustration in his voice. "Where do you go all the time?" Claire's reply was immediate. "Don't start, Daniel. I run this house. If I didn't handle things, nothing would get done." "Then why do the bills keep piling up?" he shot back. "Why are we always short?" She faltered then, only for a moment before regaining her composure. "Because your mother doesn't help. She just sits there while we shoulder everything." My pen dug into the paper as I wrote her words down, my hand trembling with rage. Even as her own lies caught up with her, she still twisted the blame back onto me. But this time, I wasn't the helpless victim. I had proof. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. My face, lined with age, carried the weight of years of sacrifice. But in my eyes, I saw something new, or perhaps something old, resurfacing. Strength. Claire thought she was clever. She thought her deceptions would remain hidden, that Daniel would remain blind, that I would remain powerless. But she had underestimated me. I had the evidence. I had the patience. I had the truth. And when the moment came to reveal it, her world would collapse around her. I closed my notebook with a steady hand. "How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone?" I whispered into the quiet of my room. The night I chose to confront them was not planned, not exactly. But there comes a moment when silence becomes unbearable, when the truth you've carried inside begins to press so heavily against your ribs that you either let it out or suffocate. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night that should have been ordinary. Claire had prepared pasta, humming under her breath, her movements sharp and efficient. Daniel sat at the table, weary as always, his shoulders slumped from the day's work. I placed the salad on the table without a word, but inside my heart was pounding like a drum. I had my notebook tucked away in my room, the folder still hidden in the desk drawer. I didn't plan to reveal everything that night, not yet. But I knew it was time to loosen the mask, to let the first thread of truth unravel. Dinner began in silence, as it often did now. Claire filled the quiet with chatter about her friends, her errands, the events she wanted to attend. Daniel nodded absent-mindedly, pushing pasta around his plate. Finally, I spoke. "Daniel," I said gently, "have you ever wondered why money seems tighter these days?" His fork paused midair. He glanced at me, then quickly at Claire. "Mom, what do you mean?" Claire didn't miss a beat. She laughed lightly, waving her hand. "Oh, Margaret, don't start. You know how bills add up: groceries, utilities. That's life." But I kept my eyes on Daniel. Bills don't explain everything. Not when money disappears in ways it shouldn't. The silence that followed was sharp. Claire set down her fork, her smile gone. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice cool but tight around the edges. "I'm suggesting," I replied calmly, "that someone isn't being honest." Daniel looked between us, confusion clouding his features. "Mom, please." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Daniel, I raised you to know the difference between truth and lies. Don't ignore what you already feel. You've noticed it, haven't you? The late nights, the spending, the secrets." Claire slammed her napkin onto the table. "This is absurd. She's twisting everything, Daniel. She's always had a suspicious mind. That's her temperament, never satisfied, always accusing." Her words echoed the insult that had cut me months ago, that old lady's temperament. But this time they didn't wound. They fueled me. Funny, I said softly. My gaze locked on hers. How you always reach for insults when you're cornered. Her eyes flashed, but I saw the flicker of fear beneath her anger. Daniel rubbed his temples. Enough, both of you. Claire. Mom. I can't do this tonight. I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. Daniel, listen to me. This isn't about me wanting to fight. This is about protecting you. You think silence will keep the peace, but silence is what's destroying you. His eyes met mine for a moment, and I saw it, the conflict, the guilt, the exhaustion of a man caught in a web he didn't weave, but couldn't escape. Claire stood abruptly, gathering plates with trembling hands. I won't sit here and be accused in my own home. I let her go, my heart steady. This wasn't the final battle. This was only the first strike. Later that evening, when Daniel passed by my room, I called his name softly. He hesitated in the doorway. Mom, why now? Why are you saying these things? I looked at him, my voice gentle but firm, because the truth can only be hidden for so long, and I love you too much to let you drown in lies. He swallowed hard, his eyes searching mine. For a moment I thought he might ask more, might demand answers, but then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know what to believe anymore. You will, I whispered. When the time comes, you'll see everything clearly. He left without another word, but I saw the seed of doubt planted in his heart. The next few days, tension hung in the air like smoke. Claire avoided me. Her footsteps clipped, her voice colder than ever. She spoke to Daniel in sharp whispers, no doubt spinning her own version of events. But Daniel was quieter than usual. His eyes shadowed his responses, distracted. One evening, I caught him standing in the kitchen, staring at a pile of unopened bills. His hands tightened around the envelopes. When he looked up and saw me, he quickly shoved them aside. Daniel, I said gently, you don't have to carry this alone. He shook his head, his jaw clenched. Mom, please. Not now. But the look in his eyes told me everything. The truth was breaking through his silence. That weekend, Claire arranged a dinner with some of Daniel's colleagues. She wanted to play the perfect wife, the gracious hostess. I stayed in my room, not invited, not wanted. But I could hear her laughter through the walls, the clinking of glasses, the practiced performance she put on for others. When the guests left, I stepped out quietly to clear a few dishes. On the counter, I noticed a receipt poking out from her purse. I shouldn't have touched it, but curiosity, sharpened by months of humiliation, pushed me forward. It was from a jewelry store, a necklace worth more than Daniel's monthly paycheck. Purchased 2 days earlier. I tucked the receipt back where it was, my hands steady. Another piece of proof. Another crack in her facade. The confrontation at the dinner table had been only the beginning. Claire now watched me more closely, her eyes sharp with suspicion, as if she sensed I knew too much. She still tried to control the narrative, but her words grew harsher, her charm slipping. And Daniel, though still trapped, was beginning to listen. I knew the storm was coming, and when it broke, I would be ready. Every performance needs an audience. Claire had always chosen hers carefully, neighbors, friends, Daniel's colleagues, even distant relatives. To them, she was the devoted wife, the charming daughter-in-law, the woman who held the family together. But I had been patient, and I knew patience always pays off. I had my notebook full of evidence, the receipt from the jewelry store fresh in my memory, the email copied carefully in my handwriting. I didn't rush. I waited for the moment when her performance would be at its peak, because the higher someone builds their mask, the harder it shatters when it falls. That moment came sooner than I expected. It was Daniel's cousin's anniversary, a gathering at their large house filled with relatives I hadn't seen in months. I debated whether to attend at all, but something inside me insisted. This is the time. When we arrived, Claire floated through the crowd like a queen, her laughter ringing, her arm looped through Daniel's as though nothing in the world could crack their perfect life. She even kissed me on the cheek at the door, whispering sweetly, "Smile, Margaret. People will be watching." Her words were meant as a warning, but I accepted them as a gift. Yes, people would be watching. And that was exactly what I wanted. Dinner was served at a long table, candlelight flickering against polished silverware. Conversations flowed easily with Claire at the center as always. She told stories, exaggerated compliments, painting herself as the pillar of Daniel's success. I sat quietly at the far end, sipping water, waiting. Then Daniel's cousin, the same one who had once questioned Claire's expensive bracelet, casually asked, "So Claire, how do you two manage so well on Daniel's salary? You always seem to have the nicest things." The question hung in the air, light on the surface but edged with curiosity. Claire laughed smoothly, though her grip on Daniel's arm tightened. "Oh, we're just good at budgeting. It's all about priorities." I felt my lips curl into the faintest smile. That was my cue. I set my glass down gently and spoke, my voice calm but carrying through the room. Priorities, yes, though some of those priorities are interesting. All eyes turned to me. Claire's smile faltered. "What do you mean, Margaret?" she asked, her tone sharp beneath its sweetness. I met her gaze steadily. "I mean that budgeting usually doesn't involve $1,000 necklaces or spa visits charged to credit cards already drowning in debt." The room went silent. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed, her face tightening like a mask about to crack. "That's absurd," she snapped. "You're making things up." I reached into my purse. My notebook, worn but steady, lay in my hands. I opened it to the page where I had copied the jewelry receipt, the dates, the purchases. My handwriting was neat, deliberate. I slid it across the table toward Daniel. "Read," I said simply. He hesitated, his eyes scanning the page, his face drained of color. Claire reached for the notebook, but I stopped her with a calm, steady hand. "No, Claire. You've rewritten my story for months. Tonight you don't get to rewrite this one." Murmurs spread around the table. Daniel's cousin leaned in, whispering, "Is this true?" Others exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. Claire straightened, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. She's always been paranoid, always suspicious. Look at her keeping notebooks, spying on us. This is exactly the kind of thing she does. You can't trust her." Her words echoed through the room, desperate now. I let her finish. Then I pulled out the copied email, sliding it forward. My voice remained steady, controlled. "Then explain this." Daniel's hands trembled as he read the words. "I miss you. When will you tell him the truth?" The silence that followed was absolute. Claire's mask shattered. She stammered, her face pale, her eyes darting wildly as though searching for a lifeline. "It's not what it looks like. It's just a friend, someone exaggerating." But the room was no longer hers. The relatives who had once admired her now looked at her with suspicion, even disgust. Her charm, her polish, her rehearsed affection, all of it dissolved under the weight of undeniable evidence. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Claire," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "what have you done?" She reached for him, her hands trembling. "Daniel, please. You have to understand." But he pulled back, his eyes filled with betrayal. For the first time in months, he looked at me. Really, looked at me, and saw the truth I had been carrying alone. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply sat back. My hands folded, my voice quiet but firm. For months, I have been painted as the problem, the burden, the old woman with a bad temperament. But lies cannot hold forever. Not when the truth is this heavy. The relatives whispered, their eyes fixed on Claire. She stood trembling, her mask in pieces, her performance exposed. When we returned home that night, the silence between Daniel and Claire was thicker than ever. She retreated to their room without a word. Daniel lingered in the kitchen, staring at the papers still in his hands. Finally, he looked at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I felt tears sting my eyes, but I held them back. "Because, Daniel, you weren't ready to hear it. You had to see it for yourself." He nodded slowly, his face etched with pain. "I see it now." And in that moment, I knew the tide had finally turned. After the family gathering, the house felt different. The silence that had once erased me was no longer empty, it was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had been exposed. Claire moved through the rooms like a ghost, her polished mask gone, her steps quick and sharp, as though she feared the walls themselves might whisper her secrets. Daniel, on the other hand, carried himself like a man broken open. He spoke less than ever, but his silence wasn't the silence of avoidance anymore. It was the silence of someone replaying every moment, every lie, every red flag he had ignored. For the first time in years, his silence wasn't against me, it was against her. The days that followed were a strange limbo. Claire tried to recover her footing. She cooked elaborate meals, left sweet notes for Daniel, touched his arm tenderly, as though affection could plaster over betrayal. But I watched her carefully, and I could see the cracks deepening. Her eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, her smile too strained, her voice too brittle. Daniel, meanwhile, barely responded. He went to work, came home, ate in silence. Sometimes I caught him staring at the folder of evidence I had finally given him, the receipts, the bank statements, the copied email. He would flip through them slowly, as if hoping the words might change if he read them enough times. One evening, I found him sitting alone at the dining table, the papers spread out in front of him. His hands covered his face. "Daniel," I said, softly approaching. He looked up at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw tears in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "How could I have been so blind?" I sat beside him, placing my hand over his. "Because love makes us blind. And because she wanted you blind. Don't punish yourself for trusting. Punish her for betraying." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "What do I do?" My heart ached, but my voice was steady. "You do what you should have done long ago. You choose truth over silence." The choice came sooner than expected. That weekend, Claire confronted him. I overheard it from my room, her voice sharp, rising with desperation. "You're going to let her turn you against me," she shouted. "After everything I've done for you?" Daniel's voice for once did not falter. "Everything you've done for me, Claire. Look at these papers. Look at this email. How long were you planning to keep lying to me?" Her tone shifted, softening instantly. "Daniel, please, you're misunderstanding. That email, it was nothing, just a friend exaggerating. The money, the shopping, it was for us. For our image. For you. For me." His laugh was bitter, hollow. "Do you think I'm that blind? Do you think I can't see what you've been doing?" There was a pause. Then her voice low and trembling. "If you believe her over me, then maybe you don't deserve me." I held my breath in the darkness of my room. Daniel's reply came steady and cold. "Maybe you're right." The next morning, the house felt different again. Claire's voice was quieter, clipped. She avoided me entirely, her eyes full of venom when they dared meet mine. But Daniel lingered near me more often, not speaking much, but staying close, as though silently apologizing for all the months he had left me alone in my invisibility. At dinner, he finally spoke. "Mom," he said quietly, "you were right." The words broke something inside me. For months I had waited, carrying the weight of silence, enduring humiliation, holding back the truth. And now to hear him finally acknowledge it, it felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile triumphantly. I only nodded. The truth always finds its way, Daniel, even when people try to bury it. But the truth had consequences. News of Claire's deception had spread through the family. Daniel's relatives whispered their admiration for her, replaced by suspicion and pity for him. Invitations slowed. Friends who once praised her charm now kept their distance. The empire of appearances she had built was crumbling, and she knew it. I caught her one evening in the kitchen gripping a wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "You think you've won?" She hissed, her voice low so Daniel wouldn't hear. "You think you're so clever sitting there with your little notebook watching? But this isn't over, Margaret. You've ruined everything for me." I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't ruin anything, Claire. You did that yourself. I just stopped letting you hide it." Her jaw clenched. She set the glass down with a sharp clink and stormed out of the room. The final fracture came 2 nights later. Daniel called a family meeting, just the three of us at the dining table. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but his voice carried a strength I hadn't heard in years. "I've made my decision," he said simply. Claire sat across from him, her arms folded tightly. "And what decision is that?" He looked at her, his voice steady. "I can't stay with someone who lies to me, who betrays me, who tries to turn me against my own mother." Her face went white. "Daniel." "No." He cut her off firmly. "Enough. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then slowly she stood, her eyes burning with fury. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "Both of you." She left the table, her footsteps echoing down the hall. A door slammed. Daniel sat back, his hands trembling. Then finally he looked at me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "For everything." Tears filled my eyes, but I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "The important thing is that you see now, and that you chose truth." That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The storm had not fully passed. I knew Claire was not done, not yet. But the tide had turned. Daniel had chosen. And for the first time in a long while, I no longer felt invisible. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not the cold silence of invisibility, not the tense silence of unspoken conflict, but a different kind altogether. The kind of silence that comes after a storm when the air is still heavy with rain, but the worst has already passed. Claire lingered in the house a little longer, moving through it like a stranger. She no longer tried to charm, no longer tried to mask. Her glares were sharp, her words clipped, her presence a constant reminder of betrayal. But she had lost her audience. Daniel barely spoke to her, and I refused to engage in her games. Within a week, she packed her bags. There was no grand goodbye, no apology, no reconciliation. She left the way she had lived in this house, dramatic but empty, slamming doors and muttering threats she no longer had the power to carry out. When the front door closed behind her, I sat in my chair by the window and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. My house felt like mine again. Daniel stood in the doorway watching me. He looked younger somehow, though the weight of guilt still clung to his shoulders. "She's gone," he said softly, as though he couldn't quite believe it. I nodded. "Yes." For a long moment we didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't painful anymore. It was healing, like the quiet after a wound is cleaned and bandaged. Finally, he sat across from me. His voice broke when he spoke. "Mom, I don't know how to make this right. I let her treat you that way. I let her turn me against you. I let you sit alone in your own home." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Daniel, the greatest mistake you made wasn't in trusting her. It was in not trusting yourself. You knew something was wrong deep down. But you chose silence. Don't choose silence again." He swallowed hard, tears filling his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I squeezed his hand gently. "Then earn it. Not through words, but through how you live from now on. You can't change the past, but you can change what you do with the truth you've learned." The weeks that followed were a quiet rebuilding. Daniel and I began sharing meals together again, just the two of us. At first, the conversations were awkward, full of hesitations and apologies, but slowly they began to feel natural like the old days. He told me about work, about his dreams, about things he had never shared with Claire because she never listened. I told him stories about his father, about our family, about the life I had lived before all of this. The house came alive again, not with the false brightness of Claire's performances, but with something softer, truer. I rehung the photographs she had tucked away. I polished the vase from my mother and placed it proudly on the mantel. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. And for the first time in a long while, when I walked through the rooms of my home, I didn't feel invisible. I felt present. But there was one more thing I needed to do, not for Daniel, not even for Claire, but for myself. I sat at my desk one evening, my notebook open in front of me. Page after page of notes stared back at me, every insult, every manipulation, every receipt, every piece of evidence I had gathered. For months, this notebook had been my shield, my weapon, my proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the cruelty. But as I looked at it now, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The truth was no longer mine alone. Daniel had seen it, the family had witnessed it, and Claire had been exposed. I closed the notebook slowly, tied it with a string, and placed it in a box at the back of my closet. Not destroyed, because history should never be erased but put away. Some battles leave scars, but scars are proof that you survived. One evening, as Daniel and I sat together watching the sun dip behind the trees, he asked quietly, "Mom, how did you stay so strong? How did you endure all of that without breaking?" I thought for a moment, choosing my words carefully. Strength isn't always loud, Daniel. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's refusing to disappear even when people pretend you're not there. I endured because I knew who I was even when she tried to make me doubt it. And I waited because I knew the truth always comes to light. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. You were right. About everything. I smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in peace. I didn't want to be right, Daniel. I just wanted to be seen. And now finally I was. Life will never return to exactly what it was before Claire. Betrayal leaves its mark, and trust once broken takes time to mend. But as I sit here in the quiet of my home, I realize something important. I am no longer waiting to be erased. I have my dignity, my strength, my truth. And if I've learned anything from this ordeal, it's that even when others try to silence you, patience and truth are the sharpest weapons of all. So to anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own family, who has endured the slow cruelty of erasure, remember this: silence does not mean defeat. Sometimes silence is preparation. Sometimes silence is power. And when the moment comes to speak, your voice will be louder than you ever imagined. Slow emotional fade out, final 250 words. I look around my home now and see more than walls and furniture. I see history. I see sacrifices. I see the love of a husband who worked until his hands were rough. The laughter of a boy who once believed his mother could do anything, and the resilience of a woman who refused to vanish. Yes, I was tested. I was insulted. I was dismissed. But in the end, I endured. And endurance, I've realized, is its own kind of victory. So if you've stayed with me until now, I ask you, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to fight quietly, patiently for the right to be seen? If you were in my place, would you forgive? Or would you let the silence turn into a weapon of its own? Comment below and share your story. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths.